Listen to the heartbeat of America.
Back in 1986, Chevrolet introduced a new coupe to their lineup, the Beretta, slotted between the Cavalier and the Lumina, to compete with other coupes such as the Ford Thunderbird and Chrysler LeBaron. But unlike those other cars, the Beretta only lived for one generation, and also went to court thanks to having the same name as an Italian gun manufacturer. This is the story of the Chevrolet Beretta. This is my old car. This is my first episode since returning from a 3-week road trip to get footage for my other YouTube channel about my Plymouth Prowler. Many thanks to all of you that have left suggestions for future My Old Car episodes in the comments or via email. The Beretta has been requested many times, and the Corsica a few times as well, so both will be featured in this episode. Following the untimely demise of the Chevy Citation by 1985, which will likely be its own future episode on this channel, GM introduced the Beretta, along with its sedan and hatchback counterpart, the Corsica, for public sale in 1987 for the 1988 model year. However, both the Beretta and Corsica were first seen on the road in 1986, thanks to sales to rental fleets to gain some real-world testing. This early public introduction helped the combination of both cars to become the second best-selling in America in 1988, second only to the Chevy Celebrity. I've had some requests for this one too, so you'll likely also see the Celebrity in a future episode. But there was one small problem. The name Beretta was already in use by an Italian gun manufacturer, specifically Fabbrica d'Armi Pietro Beretta. In 1987, when they learned of the possibility of GM using the Beretta name on an upcoming car line, lawyers for the Beretta gun maker warned GM not to use the name, but GM decided to go forward with using the Beretta name anyway. The gun maker, which had been in business for over 500 years, had the Beretta name trademarked since 1954, so they weren't about to let GM off easy, ultimately striking back with a lawsuit in July of 1988, demanding $250 million in damages. That's more than $500 million in today's dollars. Thankfully for GM, an out-of-court settlement was reached in February of 1989. GM was required to donate $500,000 to the newly formed Beretta Foundation for Cancer Research, and GM had to make it clear in their advertising that the Beretta gun maker had given GM the rights to use their name. The two companies also exchanged gifts, a Beretta GTU coupe, and 2 Beretta shotguns. Car and Driver magazine parodied the lawsuit that same year by staging a 0 to 60 comparison test between Beretta the car and Beretta the gun. I think we all know who won that comparison. Some may also confuse the Beretta car with the old American TV crime detective show Beretta. Yes, I know they aren't spelled the same, but they sound almost the same. That show only ran 3 seasons and ended almost 10 years before the Chevy Beretta debuted, so it's not likely anyone confused the names back then. But I recall noticing the very similar names back when I was a teenager. Both the Beretta and Corsica were built on what was then known as GM's L-body platform, which itself was derived from the J-body, most well known for the Chevy Cavalier and all of its clones. But unlike the J-body, the L-body platform was only used for 3 models, the Beretta and the Corsica for the US, and if you were from Canada, the Pontiac Tempest, which was a rebadged Corsica. In America, the Tempest name is much more well known for the models GM produced in the 60s and 70s, where it shared a platform with other well-known cars of that era, initially with the Chevy Corvair, and then later with the Chevelle, Pontiac Le Mans, Oldsmobile Cutlass, and Buick Skylark. If you had one of the first Berettas in 1987, you only had 2 options, a base or a GT model. Both had their engines sourced directly from the Cavalier, either a 2.2-liter inline-4 for the base model, or a 2.8-liter V6 for the GT. Most came with a 3-speed automatic. Manual transmissions were offered on the 4-cylinder, but very few were sold in the base trim, although manual transmissions would show up again in later model years for the more sporty-oriented models. However, there is one 1987 Beretta that you couldn't buy, at least not back then. GM built a prototype version with an Isuzu-designed 3.5-liter V8 engine and 5-speed manual transmission. It was called the Ferretta, replacing the B with an F, since the idea was that it could possibly replace GM's F-body cars, namely the Camaro and Firebird. But this car never went beyond the concept stage and remained in the GM Heritage Museum in Sterling Heights, Michigan until 2009, after which they offered it up for sale at the Barrett-Jackson auction, and as of today it is now privately owned. In 1988 and 89, if you wanted a GT that looked faster than it actually was, Chevy also offered the Beretta in GTU trim. The GTU name came from race car driver Tommy Kendall, racing a Chevrolet-sponsored Beretta GTU in the IMSA GTU Racing Series. Specifically, the GTU name referred to Grand Touring, or GT cars, and the letter U referred to cars under 2.5 liters of displacement. Although technically it was incorrect to use on the production Beretta since its displacement was 2.8 liters. GM ran with the GTU name anyway, partnering with an aftermarket company called Cars and Concepts, located in Brighton, Michigan. Cars and Concepts modified GT models, installing 16 by 7 inch aluminum wheels, custom ground effects, a rear spoiler, and GTU decals, but it was still powered by the GT's 2.8-liter V6. 1990 is a landmark year for Beretta fans for two reasons. The first reason is that 1990 introduced the GTZ model, replacing the GTU. The GTZ had a 2.3-liter inline four-cylinder, dubbed the Quad 4, originally produced by GM's Oldsmobile division, producing 180 horsepower. This raucous engine had its critics, due to it being loud and high vibrating under high revs. The Quad 4 was mated to a manual transmission, sourced by German manufacturer Getrag, which supplied the same transmission in many different makes and models, not just GM. Later GTZ models could be ordered with a 140 horsepower 3.1-liter V6, and eventually the manual transmission was dropped, leaving only with a 3-speed automatic. The second reason 1990 is notable was that it introduced the Beretta convertible concept, but for Beretta fans, it ended up as a huge disappointment. The public first saw it as the Indy Pace Car on May 27, 1990. 5 convertibles were there that day, all painted yellow, with basket-style handles behind the driver to maintain the B-pillar door handles. At that race, GM announced that the convertible would be available for sale at Chevy dealerships that summer. Although 7,500 pace car replicas were produced, none were convertibles, and instead were simply coupes with Indy badging. By September 1990, after spending $20 million on development, GM announced the convertible project would be canceled due to failures in crash testing, poor rigidity, and significant body flex, with the basket handle providing no significant structural integrity. All in all, a major embarrassment for GM. The GTZ models lasted through 1993, after which they were replaced with a Z26 trim. This added to the Chevy lineup of Z cars, joining the Cavalier Z24, the Lumina Z34, and of course the Camaro Z28. And its 3.1-liter V6 increased its horsepower rating to 160, but the Quad 4 dropped from 180 to 175 thanks to new emission controls. The Beretta's four-door siblings, the Corsica and Tempest, started out with the same 2-liter four-cylinder Cavalier engine as the Beretta, or the 2.8-liter V6 shared with the Celebrity. The Tempest, an almost identical twin to the Corsica except for badging, was only sold in Canada through 1991, at which time it was replaced with the same Pontiac Grand Am that had already been available to the American market. Although a 5-speed manual transmission was an option on the Corsica, the 3- and 4-speed automatics were more common. And although never really intended to be a sports car, the Corsica did offer an LTZ trim that featured some suspension parts from the Beretta. There was even a rare XT trim with an aftermarket body kit and rear spoiler. In 1989, Chevy began offering the Corsica as a 5-door hatchback model. The 5-door was identical on the outside to the 4-door from the front of the car to the rear doors, with just the hatch taking over the 4-door's rear window and trunk lid. Although the rear hatch made the car much more practical, hatchbacks were increasingly becoming less desirable back then, so this option only lasted through the 1991 model year. By 1992, it became clear that no one was buying into the idea of the Corsica being a sports car.
That thing gonna hit me? No, sir, it does not. All right, then.
Manual transmissions were dropped on the V6 and was rarely offered for the 4-cylinder, and later the manual was dropped altogether for the US market. It went through a few very minor refreshes in its final years, but like the Beretta, its days were numbered. 1996 was the final model year for both the Beretta and the Corsica. The Beretta sales have been sliding for the past few years as consumer interest in 2-door models continued to wane, so no replacement was planned. Although both cars were soon going to require a significant redesign anyway to abide to government safety standards. So in 1997, GM replaced the Corsica with the Malibu, which itself was a name Chevy had used from 1964 to 1983. And as of the recording of this video, several generations later, the Malibu is still for sale. Although with a public obsession with SUVs and crossovers, its days may be numbered too. Although the idea of a sports coupe has changed significantly since their introduction of the Beretta in 1987, I suspect many former owners have fond memories of how hot the Beretta looked back when it was new, and anyone who still owns one may still feel that way. It was so hot that back in 1991, the makers of the movie Knight Rider 2000 thought Berettas could be future police cars. Today, American sport coupes with a back seat have maintained a devout following for at least 2 models, the Dodge Challenger and the Ford Mustang. But over at GM, rumors have been circulating that the Chevy Camaro may not last beyond 2023. Other car makers offer sports coupes, but their sales numbers are relatively tiny, thanks to the world's obsession with SUVs making sports coupes an increasingly endangered species. So in today's car market, the Beretta probably wouldn't fare any better than it did in the 1990s. Thanks for watching. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, put a reply in the comments or email me at the address shown here. See you next time.